There's our skiff right there in primer. That is TotalBoat 2-part epoxy primer. I had put 2 coats of primer on it first, and I prepped that all up and sanded it out and did a little filling with Total Fair over that and sanded all that out. And then I rolled 2 hot coats over that. So what you're looking at is 4 coats of TotalBoat epoxy primer, and this stuff is great. It dries great, and I had told you that I liked it because it dried. There's other reasons why I like it, and I'm going to talk about it some more, but first I wanted to show you this down here. Now, I finally decided to put primer below the lift rails because first I was going to paint it all the way up to the lift rails with bottom paint, but it makes the topsides look a little small. So rather than cut a waterline across them or anything like that, I finally decided that what I would do was bring the waterline out from under the lift rail somewhere back in here and have it taper out somewhere up in here. And that's fine because the waterline really isn't going to be any different than that. The boat is going to float with the bow almost out of the water. Sometimes the problem with some of these skiffs that people would make with them curved way up on the bottom would be that the sunlight would shine on the water in front here and shine up on the bottom, and the bottom plank would never be wet, so it would dry out if you left the boat alone for any length of time, and that was a problem. So I didn't curve mine up too high. I think this is going to make the boat look a lot broader up forward and a lot nicer. So the next thing for us to do is finish sanding up this primer, and we're getting ready to put our first coat of topside paint on. Now I'm doing all the sanding on this boat by hand, all of it. There hasn't been any machines used whatsoever in this sanding process. You know, the last machine I used on the topside was an electric plane. That was a long time ago. Now I don't really mind sanding a boat like this by hand because it isn't a huge boat, and I can get away with it. And it comes out really nice. You get friendly with the surface here by hand because every imperfection and your eyes are right up close to it and everything like that. It fairs the boat at the same time, as long as you've got something on there that will help you fair it, like the thickness of the primer. And what I did was, with this primer, on the first 2 coats, I rolled a coat over it while it was still wet, so I napped it up pretty thick. It went on there pretty thick, and it sands the next day, and that's one of the things I love about this primer. I remember saying that I love the way it dries, and it does not fail to dry, but it fills too. It's a great filler at the same time, and it sands easy. Another thing I'm doing here is I'm sanding it with 80 weight paper. And the 80 weight paper kind of cuts across some people's grain a little bit because they say, well, isn't it awful heavy? Doesn't it scratch the surface? Well, that's the whole idea of sandpaper, is to scratch the surface. You're trying to scratch it down until there's no imperfections in it, you know, and it does leave a little bit of scratch marks in it, but it really isn't anything. You're going to fill all of that with paint all over again. And after all the heavy work is done, and I've got it all sanded with that 80 weight paper, I am going to go over it with some 220, but it happens much, much quicker. I wouldn't want to start with 220, so I start with a little heavier paper, and I think that's the way to go. It's really come out nicely here. You also notice periodically I'm knocking my paper out, but before I do it, I take a look at it to see whether or not anything's building up on it. And it does get a buildup in there, but it's just sitting on there. One whack, it's gone. It doesn't stick to the paper, it doesn't stick to the paint, and it cleans up. You can do a massive amount of sanding with a very small amount of sandpaper. It really works for me. We're just about to start applying the topside paint, but there's just a few things up forward here I wanted to show you before we do that. And one is about these cap rails here. Now, people have asked me about these cap rails. Maybe they don't quite understand why it is I've left them up like this. Well, you don't really want to recess them down in here. You'd have like a woodworking nightmare here that wouldn't look too good. I never wanted to carry them all the way forward and join them up with the stem. There's really no need for it. They are replaceable, and this is the first thing people would wear out probably, so you just rip them off, and it doesn't affect everything. This is the way to go right here. And the other thing with it is they've asked me why I don't round these corners off. Well, I just haven't got around to it yet, that's all. You know, so what we're going to do is take this bottle cap and put it on here, draw a little line around there like that, just as a guide, and then one over here. A quarter was a little too small, or I'd have used a quarter. I like using a quarter for all kinds of things. Now we're going to go around this side. and just trace our little cap right around here on this corner. Just a little guide to follow. One in here. Just like that. We're going to take a chisel and a mallet here and round the ends of the covering boards right off. I've got a little guideline on the top there now, and I'm going to take the right size chisel, because there is the right size chisel. You wouldn't want to use a little narrow chisel or a big wide one, you know. There's the right chisel. That's why they make different size chisels. And I've got the right one right here. It's sharp as can be. Maybe I had thought previously of kind of pushing down vertically with the chisel, but I know that one wrong little tiny move and I'm going to be stabbing the chisel into the guardrail and different things like that, and you'd make a mess. I'd never get away with this many corners if I used that technique. I'd mess it up somehow. So basically what I'm going to do is use this technique, and it just doesn't get into the covering boards or the guards or anything like that in the wrong way. And you can see the grain as I start to knock this piece off. The wood just curls right up, kind of. It's not really on the annual rings or the medullary rays. It's kind of due to the thickness of the wood, really. And it kind of peels right off of there, and it's like a little accordion kind of a thing. It's pretty cool to watch it happen, really. So I'm finishing up with the chisel here, and I'm going to put that away and grab a piece of 80 weight sandpaper, because I can smooth it up a little bit more than I left it with the chisel. And it's easier to inspect it really after you sand it a little bit, because one part of it will be kind of shiny and the other part will be dull. So you can see if you haven't sanded it enough. It's very, very simple. You sand it a little bit, you take a peek at it and blow the dust away, you pick up your sandpaper again and go at it a little bit more, and done deal, just like that. Now I'm going to show you a little bit more about these covering boards right here. They actually act like chocks. And we always used to do this. As long as you put the covering boards on thick enough, they really work nice. And sometimes when you round the back corner here of the breast hook, you cut a slot down in here, so the line lays right down in that slot, and it won't pop out of there at all. You can put your anchor line in there, or your crab pot, you know, halyard, or whatever it is that you want, and it works pretty good. Instead of having a piece of hardware up here, you know, I mean, you can do it, but I think this kind of stuff works really great, and it's kind of traditional. We always did it this way, and it's lovely. It doesn't matter if it wears a little bit or not to me. And then I wanted to show you the stem head here again, and I've rounded the corners of the hole out here. I just took a rasp to it instead of a router or anything like that. We're going to use that hole to tie a bowline through it, or what I call a painter, actually. And we're going to tie a bowline right here. I'm going to look at it the same way you're looking at it. I've got the bitter end over the standing part. And what you do is you throw the bitter end up through there, grab it with your thumb, and pull it around, and then pull that and invert the standing part into a loop. And then you come around and go down the hole, and that is a bowline right there. Now, I like it because you can throw it back over the stem head, and you can keep track of it inside the boat. You can see it, because you don't want your bowline going overboard and going under the boat and getting into the propeller back aft. So be careful with that when you do this. But the next thing I want to show you is the way I would like to do it, actually, and that would be, I would use what they call a slippery bowline. And it's going to be tied almost exactly the same way. You just go through the hole here, around, you put it over the top like I showed you, you put it up through, invert the standing part into a loop, and then you'd stuff a loop down through there instead of the whole bitter end, and what you have is what they call a slippery bowline. Now that's pretty nice, because all you have to do to get it untied is to pull the bitter end, and it unties itself to a certain extent. But look, I've still got the boat tied up here. Now, if a captain gave his crew an order to prepare to cast off, and this was the situation where he had a bowline tied off like that, he could actually prepare to cast off just like this, and he's still got a hold of the boat, and the thing won't come out at all. It's just sitting there just like that, and you hold it with one hand like so, and you take the bitter end and you put it down here like that. Now, you just hold it like that, and then when the captain says cast off, you just pull the bitter end again, and the thing just disappears, just like that. I'm going to take this moment to show you the planing down of the scarf that I made in the middle of the covering boards right here. Now, I see no need to waste my time by hand. You know, it's got a little bit of maybe a 1/16 of an inch of misalignment right there that was planned in the scarf so that I could plane it like that. And I'm just going to grab my electric plane, go over it a few swipes, and there you have it. It's really easy to take care of. We're getting very close to painting the top sides right now, but one thing I want to do is strike a water line from the lowest part of the lift rail forward, much lower than I had originally planned on it. You know, the water line is going to be where the water line is. It's just where you paint it, you know, is what we're talking about here. I was going to paint it all the way up to the lift rails, but now I've decided not to do it because it makes the boat look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to use the same method that I used to use with a string almost, except for with a string, you'd have 2 batter boards and 2 people, one on each end, because you never want the string to touch the hull. You want it to get very close to it. This is a little different. I'm all by myself here. I know where the water line's going to be on that end, and if I did use a string, I'd pull it, and what would happen be, because the hull's on a little bit of an angle, as you pull it, it would want to roll down the hull, and it would start lying to you by the time you got up here. It wouldn't be straight. But with a piece of tape, it's a little bit different because I can take this tape, and I've got my batter board set up. I sighted that from up forward, actually, is how I set that up. And I'm going to use the tape, but as it comes in and makes contact with the hull, it sticks right there. So watch this. I'm going to slide along the batter board. I've got the tape nice and tight. And now, you know, you can be a little nervous. It doesn't matter. As long as you got it nice and tight like this, we're going to come right in until it contacts the hull like that. Now, I'd bet you, if you were to get down and look at that, that would look like you did it with some sort of transit or something. It looks perfect, absolutely perfect. I'm using a Scotch-Brite pad now, and I'm going to go over the hull one last time after I sanded it with 220. And the reason is to make sure there's no remnants of sanding dust or anything that rolled up and deposited on the hull. So what I'm going to do is go right over it with that Scotch-Brite. You can feel anything behind it if there was anything stuck on there. So you rip it all off with a Scotch-Brite, do a nice, neat job, and then I'm going to go over it one last time with some solvent before we paint. Now it's time to paint. And we're going to be using TotalBoat Wet Edge Cold Cure Topside paint. Now this is the paint to use right here because it's pretty chilly in our shop right here, and this stuff goes off really good in cooler temperatures. So that was the idea why I picked it, really. We're going to strain this paint just for the heck of it, and then we're going to pour it into our rolling pan and head over to the boat. I'm starting here at the bow with a brush just under the gunnel, and that's the way to go because you don't want to take your time too much with the roller trying to get at those details right there. You could probably reach it, but it wouldn't be the thing to do. You do the corners first with a brush, and then you take your roller and fill in between. I've started here with a little brush. I'm using a little foam brush, and it'll do the job because it's solvent safe. There's no solvent in this paint that will melt the foam brush. And this is the way to go because I like to get the corners done first. That way it doesn't take any extra time with the roller. So that's why I'm starting off with the brush. I'm just about to start rolling. You know, I've never rolled this paint. I don't know how well it's going to go. I don't know how thick it's going to apply. I don't really know anything about it except for the fact that that went pretty well. And you have to develop a technique as you go along, to find out how it's covering and, you know, just make some decisions as you go. But I'm forced to go, and I'm going to go. We're going to roll. No, I don't want to put too much paint on the roller to start because you can overweight it on one side and then you can't get it around the roller. But see, now I've got it all the way around. Here we go. Now as close to the rail as I can get it without ruining my roller here. All right, I gotta go back. I'm developing a technique when I start here. You know, how much am I going to put on? How far am I going to stretch it out? How am I going to tip it? Things like that. But you're going to learn it in 3 feet right here before we go on rolling the whole rest of the boat the wrong way. We're going to know what we're doing before we start here. Now I'm only going to cover about 3 feet of it right here. And then I'm going to watch and see what it does. And see if I can't apply a little bit more over it while it's still wet. If I can get it to nap up a little bit heavier, it would be kind of nice. Although this is actually pretty nice just the way it is right here, but we'll see what happens here. I'm actually going to go back and you might say tip it with a dry roller. That just means that I'm going to go out in front of myself a little bit and dry this roller out a little bit. I'm not going to use another roller. I'm going to distribute this fairly well, like so. And I'm going to stretch it a little bit just to make sure I don't have any extra paint on there, like that. And then I'm going to tip it. Now, when you set the roller down, you can see where it sits. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play with it this way and see if I can pick the roller up without leaving a roller mark. And you can. Let me try this here. Roll that. Okay, now. Yeah, you see, you can pick it up better than you can set it down. That's the way to tip it, like that. And that builds a little bit of a nap. It's got a reasonably good cover for one coat. Not bad. Now I'm making sure that the roller does not touch the side of the boat because you'd be able to see it if it did. Now this is a moment we've been waiting for, to get some finished paint on the hull, because when you put finished paint on things and things start to shine, you can really see whether things are fair in front of you, and they are. It's nice and fair, beautiful, and there's a reason why I spent all that time sanding this boat. I wanted this boat to look fair, and it does look fair, and this is tricky wood to get fair. Any wood with steeple grain in it like this is very hard to fair it out. I actually, like I said, had to start with an electric plane. That was more to fair it longitudinally. And then I was cross-hatching it with sandpaper or those screen pads. And the whole idea of that was to get it locally, right over the steeple grain to be fair without hogging out the softer grain. It's a tricky process actually, and it's probably, like I said, against the grain of an awful lot of people to see me sanding diagonally like that, and yet it just comes out smoother and smoother and smoother, and this is the result of it right here. A nice fair paint job, because this thing is going to be so shiny, if it's not fair, you're going to tell. Now this tipping thing here, I've decided not to use a brush to tip it with because I think the roller works actually even better. It does a better job. I don't have to keep switching tools. And really the technique is to dry the roller out in front of you a little bit. You pick a 3-foot spot or a 4-foot spot that you want to roll the paint on and then roll back and forth and distribute it. Then you roll across that and stretch it down onto the dry a little bit to make sure you don't have piles of paint in any one spot. And then you actually roll it or tip it the other direction from the dry end to the wet end, because you can pick the roller right off the paint job real easy without making a dark spot, you know, or getting into your primer, but you can't lay it down that way. So what you do is you tip from the dry to the wet with a roller, and it works out terrific. We just have to be careful that we remember all the things we know about painting and get the rest of this thing painted up, and it's going to be sanded and prepped again and painted some more after this, but it's getting better and better every time we touch it. So there's our first coat of topside paint right there, and it's wet edge cold cure. And I was pretty anxious to roll a coat of this on because I wanted to see how fast it would dry. I figured cold cure paint must dry faster, and I think it did. another coat or two of this, and it's really going to look good. You can see through this finished paint into the primer here and there where you stop with the brush or start or with the roller. So, you know, it was to be expected. It's not real thick paint, and you don't want to put a thick coat on, a real thick coat, because you have trouble with running and different things like that. The trick to polyurethane paint is to get a thin coat on and get it on right, because less is more with polyurethane paint, and that's just the way it is. So it's pretty interesting to do some painting at all, and I think this thing came out great. I like it. I think the job looks fantastic, and we've got more things to do to the skiff. Obviously, we're going to plug holes and different things. We just haven't done that yet. You know, that's all I can say about it. We haven't done it yet, and we're going to plug the rails and the caps and different things, and we're going to put one knee in it in front of the outboard motor. That's still down in New York. We're going to cut that down in a tree down in New York here pretty shortly. That'll be fun for us to go off on a trip doing that, and we've got to install that, but we got a number of weeks left, and it gives us plenty of time to do a real nice job on finishing the skiff up.